book of Proverbs. We won't look at all the Proverbs, but just group them together. And as we did see before, there was one prayer request that came through that I thought encapsulates the desire for wisdom and the need for something like the book of Proverbs, where it says, please pray for God to guide me and show me wisdom in preparing and executing the next steps in my life. Amen. That's one of the more powerful requests, and this is one that we all should have, praying for wisdom to make the right decisions when embarking on a major journey in life. And that's because it's so easy to make mistakes, doing what we think is best, and often not thinking at all, just doing things that may or may not turn out well for us. But the good news is that God gives warning signs when we're going in the wrong direction, about to speed through a red light or run past a stop sign as we travel along life's highway. When he gives us those signs, when he speaks to us, those are times to take a self-assessment to make sure we're on the right path. And those signs may be health problems, financial difficulties, family squabbles, or job-related stress. And when they occur, it's time to pause and think whether or not we may be causing the problems. Or a warning sign might simply be a word of caution spoken to our conscience. But God can only speak to our conscience when he has something to work with, like his word. And this is the reason for the book of Proverbs to put words of wisdom in our conscience to help us make the right decisions. And one of those warnings Solomon recorded is to young men, alerting them to the dangers of getting involved with other women outside the bounds of one's own marriage. And it could take the form of adultery on either part or just plain casual sex. And Solomon writes about this at length, at least 3 times in Proverbs, and in succession, chapters 5, 6, and 7, as if to say, this is a word from God, please take it seriously. Many of the requests that we received about wisdom had nothing to do with this topic, but as we go through, it's like this has to stand out because Solomon repeated it so many times. And it's like we have to take a look because it might be necessary. So while going through the Bible, when God speaks like this, repeating the same thing multiple times, we can't ignore it. And in this case, and if these words don't apply to us, pass them on to others so they won't ignore them. But first, let's take a look at Solomon's own life. Solomon, when he was young, he comes across initially as being dependent on his mother. He was the rightful heir to the throne, but it was his mother who fought to get him seated. She was the one who saw her life and her son's life in jeopardy if the coup to overthrow the king was successful. And she was the one who appealed to the king to place Solomon on the throne immediately. And she was the one Solomon turned to help him reign by making her queen mother, having a throne made just for her and placing it next to his. So it was in this context that Solomon was focused not on other women, but in doing the will of the Lord. This is the time he prayed for wisdom to rule God's people, and God gave him both wisdom and wealth beyond measure. Now, this is the time he dedicated his life to building up God's temple. And then at the dedication of the temple, God filled the space, appeared to him, and God said to him and them, if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and will heal their land. So Solomon, he had this awesome experience, but it was at this time he was totally dedicated to the Lord. And this is also the time Solomon documented the ways of the world and wrote the thousands of insights for daily living for those who dare to be wise. One example of his wisdom was in the story about splitting the baby in half. And that's an expression that's often heard today, but still misused. And it harkens back to the wisdom of Solomon. Now, there were two mothers who were friends who gave birth around the same time, but one night, after one of the mothers accidentally suffocated her own baby sleeping with her, she claimed to be the mother of the other baby. And so both mothers came to Solomon to decide who would have parental rights as the real mother. And Solomon said, okay, 50-50. Let's split the baby in half. Half for you and half for you. And he knew the true mother would not want her child killed, and he also had no intention of splitting the baby. And true to form, the mother who had lost her baby said, that sounds fair. But the real mother immediately spoke up and relinquished her rights to spare the life of her child. And it was then obvious by the actions of the two who the real mother was. And just by that one episode, the fame of Solomon spread throughout the land. He was at the pinnacle of success materially, and he was living on a high spiritually. But he does not heed his own advice and allows himself to be seduced by other women. And as he ages, Solomon conquered everything except his own heart. And if we take a look at 1 Kings chapter 11, before looking at Proverbs, 1 Kings chapter 11, just some of the verses there to give the backstory of his downfall. 1 Kings chapter 11, just some of the verses there, beginning at verse 1. It says plain and simple, King Solomon was obsessed with women. Pharaoh's daughter was only the first of many foreign women he loved. In verse 2, he took them from the surrounding pagan nations, of which God had clearly warned Israel, you must not marry them, they'll seduce you into infatuations with their gods. But Solomon fell in love with them anyway, refusing to give them up. In verse 4, as he grew older, his wives beguiled him with their alien gods, and he became unfaithful. He didn't stay true to his God as his father David had done. Interestingly enough, David, he had his moral problems, but he still kept his sights on the Lord. Solomon, on the other hand, is departing from God altogether. And in verse 6, it says as much, Solomon openly defied God. And the following verses, building shrines even to false gods, something that David did not do. In verse 9, God was furious with Solomon for abandoning the God of Israel, the God who had twice appeared to him and had so clearly commanded him not to fool around with other gods. Solomon faithlessly disobeyed God's orders. And so as a result, God promised that his kingdom, Solomon's kingdom, would only be a shell of itself. His enemies would start picking it apart piece by piece until only a tribe or two was left. But there had to have been warning signs for Solomon all along the way. But he flew right past them, just disregarding even his own words, even his own proverbs. Just flew right by them. And the same thing can happen to us. We might think that we're on top and that we can do anything, but we have to realize the consequences if we sin. The consequences if we sin are already in the making. We don't see it, and so we think that we might be invincible, that we can do anything that we want, we can get away with anything that we want, but the consequences of sin, if we sin, are already there to devour us. And it's only by the grace of God that we're not consumed. And so we must stay in his will to benefit from his grace and mercy. And here's some of the words of wisdom before Solomon fell. They speak, most of them speak for themselves. They all speak for themselves, and a little need for commentary. But I'll read some of these from NIV and just make a few comments. Proverbs chapter 5, just some of the verses we'll look at. I'm sorry, from the Message translation, which really explains itself. Verse 3, Proverbs 5, verse 3. The lips of a seductive woman are oh so sweet, her soft words are oh so smooth. And skipping to verse 9, you don't want to squander your wonderful life, to waste your precious life among the hard-hearted. The consequences. And verse 11, starting there. You don't want to end your life full of regrets, nothing but sin and bones, saying, oh, why didn't I do what they told me? Why did I reject a disciplined life? Why didn't I listen to my mentors or take my teachers seriously? My life is ruined. I haven't one blessed thing to show for my life. Do you know the saying, drink from your own rain barrel, drink water from your own spring-fed well? And the meaning behind that is really your own spouse. Just enjoy your own spouse. That's what he's saying. In verse 16, it's true, otherwise you may one day come home and find your barrel empty and your well polluted. Your spring water is for you and you only, not to be passed around among strangers. Bless your flesh, your fresh flowing fountain. Enjoy the wife you married as a young man. Basically that. Enjoy the wife you married as a young man. Lovely as an angel, beautiful as a rose. Don't ever quit talking. Don't ever quit taking delight in her body. Never take her love for granted. Amen. And then verse 21, starting there. Mark well that God doesn't miss a move you make. He's aware of every step you take. The shadow of your sin will overtake you. You'll find yourself stumbling all over yourself in the dark. Death is the reward of an undisciplined life. Your foolish decisions trap you in a dead end. Politicians, as we all know, they have a history of messing up their home life. Maybe because they leave their families behind and get caught up in the power of the office and fall into the same traps Solomon did. But we see now how the mighty have fallen. It seems like every week another politician fallen. And now America's most revered dad fallen. And a host of Nike executives fallen. Say it ain't so, Trevor. Who's going to run Nike now? And then in Proverbs 6:25, it says, don't lustfully fantasize on her beauty, nor be taken in by her bedroom eyes. This is a warning sign. Don't fly right past it. Take it to heart. Another warning sign, verse 27, 28. Can you build a fire in your lap and not burn your pants? Can you walk barefoot on hot coals and not get blisters? These are God's warning signs saying, danger, do not enter. These are his flagman holding up the stop sign, directing traffic to another lane because the one you're in is too dangerous to continue on. And then Proverbs 7, starting at verse 6, it says, as I stood at the window of my house, looking out through the shutters, watching the mindless crowd stroll by. Mindless crowd. I spotted a young man without any sense, arriving at the corner of the street where she lived and turning up the path to her house. It was dusk, the evening coming on, the darkness thickening into night. Just then a woman met him. She'd been lying in wait for him, dressed to seduce him. Brazen and brash she was, restless and roaming, never at home, walking the streets, loitering in the mall. I guess they had Tyson's Mall back then. Just loitering in the mall, hanging out at every corner in town. She threw her arms around him and kissed him, boldly took his arm and said, I've got all the makings for a feast. Today I made my offerings, vows are all paid. In a sense, I'm all prayed up, I can do whatever I want to do now. So now I've come to find you, hoping to catch sight of your face, and here you are. And if we just skip to 22, the consequences. Before you know it, he's trotting behind her like a calf led to the butcher shop, like a stag lured into ambush, and then shot with an arrow, like a bird flying into a net, not knowing that its flying life is over. So friends, listen to me. Take these words of mine seriously. Don't fool around with a woman like that. Don't even stroll through her neighborhood. Another warning sign, just stay away. Countless victims come under her spell. She's the death of many a poor man. She runs a halfway house to hell, fits you out with a shroud and a coffin. Bottom line is, don't dream about any other. Enjoy who you have. No commentary.